documenting stuff is critically important in terms of ensuring you have the support of your community.
A look back at the First Nations Financial Transparency Act.
And I mean, who doesn't want to come spend a day on a beach once a week throughout the summer?
And surf's up on the shores of Cape Breton Island as kids learn to ride the waves. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. Tonight we begin on the West Coast, where a state of emergency has been declared for the province of British Columbia.
More than 560 wildfires are currently burning in BC, and Vancouver is covered in smoke. The state of emergency will be in effect for 2 weeks, but could be extended if the situation doesn't improve. Some First Nations in British Columbia are being threatened by the wildfires, and residents may need to leave. The Carrier-Sakani Tribal Council is praying for rain so they can bring their elders back home who have had to leave due to health reasons from all the smoke.
There's been blackout smoke situations where there's been total darkness. And there's been like a lot of smoke inhalation, so we've been moving a lot of the elders out of the communities into Prince George, into the hotels are packed in Prince George right now with our elders. To Ottawa, where Environment Minister Catherine McKenna announced a Climate Action Fund Wednesday morning. $3 million will go to support projects across Canada. McKenna wants youth, university students, small businesses, and Indigenous groups to apply for funding to spread the word on climate change and build a more sustainable future. The deadline is September 21st. APTN asked why Indigenous people should get involved when many are fighting climate change by opposing the expansion of the fossil fuel industry.
The overarching message I hear is, like all Canadians, they want to ensure that they have jobs and economic opportunities, and they really care about protecting the environment and taking action on climate change. I don't think you can generalize, and I think that we're committed to working with Indigenous peoples. That's part of our commitment to Indigenous peoples, and we also, need to be making sure that we make decisions that are in the best interest of Canadians.
Politicians were in Iqaluit today to announce continued funding for an adult literacy project run by Nunavut's Arctic College. Arctic College will receive $6 million to fund the program for the next 3 years. The adult literacy program began in 2011, and since then, over 1,500 students have used it to upgrade their education. According to Nunavut's premier, that makes a big difference.
We've been given the $6 million here to continue programs like this where people can better their life and have a better chance of getting more training and education and getting a job to provide for themselves and their families.
And we want to hear what you have to say. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. Also, you can follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news.
Canada is about to get a new national statutory holiday. It will mark the country's shameful residential school legacy and is widely expected to fall on Orange Shirt Day, September 30th. The federal government had been consulting national Indigenous groups about the proposed holidays. We're now joined by National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Perry Bellegarde. Welcome, National Chief. You've already come out in support of this national holiday. Why is that, and what did the government do to consult with the AFN on this initiative?
This is an important stat holiday when it comes to residential schools. Our Assembly of First Nations, even going back to 2010, our chiefs in Assembly have passed resolutions calling for this statutory holiday. And it's very important because I've always talked about the need to educate the Canadian people about the impacts of the residential schools. So education awareness should lead to understanding, should lead to action. So it's a very important day.
So if we have a stat day off for this, does it do any good if there's not an educational component along with it? It just could be another day off.
Well, that's the whole thing. You know, we have so many statutory holidays in Canada already, but this one to me is different. This one to me is very important. This one, to me, is a chance to educate all Canadians about the impacts of the residential school and the impacts that we still see in 2018 and beyond, the intergenerational trauma, the intergenerational impacts of the residential schools. Like, I don't call it cultural genocide. I call it genocide of a people. And it was really trying to kill First Nations people in Canada. And when I say that, I think about their languages, our culture, our individual self, our families. So when you have a statutory holiday, it is a chance to educate Canadian people about those impacts. And this is a very important thing to have. And I would urge all the Canadians to really use that day to learn about the residential schools. And I'd even go one step further and call on all provincial premiers and governments to change their curriculums as well and teach this in the school systems, right from kindergarten to grade 12. That's all part of that education awareness campaign.
So the day is a result of one of the calls of action from the TRC Commission. How satisfied are you that the federal government is on track to enact the 76 that fall under their jurisdiction?
Well, again, we were pleased as Chiefs in Assembly when the Prime Minister came and he mentioned 5 things to our chiefs a few years back. 1, that there'd be an inquiry into missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. 2, that all 94 calls to action will be implemented and honored. 3, there'd be investments in education. 4, a new fiscal relationship with the Crown. And 5, a federal law and policy review. Those things were stated to our chiefs in Assembly. Now, when it comes to the 94 calls to action, there's still a lot of work to get done. You're not going to implement those 94 calls to action in 1 or 2 fiscal years. There has to be long-term sustained strategies. And so there's got to be a greater emphasis, a greater focus, greater amount of resources, both human and financial, to get it done. And that's the push that we have to keep doing from the Assembly of First Nations, is pushing for those resources to make sure that it happens sooner than later.
And beyond having a national holiday, what else would you like to see Canadians doing to mark this tragic period in history?
Well, again, I would say when you start talking about, there's 2 things that hurt First Nations people in Canada. 1 was the residential schools, and it was a genocide of our people. Number 2 was the Indian Act in 1876. So I would urge all Canadians, when the federal government starts looking at law and policy review, when they start looking at an act to revitalize Indigenous languages, when they make investments in education and housing and water, to support those things, because the gap in the quality of life will start to close. And I say to Canadians that that's not only good for our people, that's good for Canada, because there's a high social cost and a high monetary cost to maintaining the status quo. So when the federal budget announces billions for housing and water, that's a good thing. When the federal government announces there's going to be greater investments in post-secondary, that's a good thing, and we need Canadian people to say that. When the federal government says we're going to enact an Indigenous languages bill, that's a good thing. And so get behind those things. And that's what I'd urge all Canadians to do, because it makes things easier when all of Canada can work in the same direction, building a better country together. I've always said that we've got to learn from the past, not live there, and let's chart a better country for all of our children and grandchildren, those yet unborn. And we can only do that by working together.
Do you have a preference of what day this is, whether it be September 30th, June 21st, Indigenous Day, or Orange Shirt Day? Do you have a preference?
No, I don't have a particular, as National Chief, I don't have a particular preference for what day. You know, I'd take it back to our APTN Executive, back to our Chiefs in Assembly. We want to be involved in picking the day, no question. And I think when we bring our minds and heads and hearts together, we'll find the right day so that it has really meaningful impact, not only for First Nations people, but for all Canadian people right across Canada.
Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this, National Chief Bellegarde.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Time for a quick break, but we have much more news when we come back.
Including this story.
I'm Angel Moore on Cape Breton Island, where teenagers from nearby First Nations are riding the waves. I'll tell you all about it later on the APTN National News.
Here's your weather starting on the east coast. We've got 23 in St. John's, 27 in Halifax, 24 in Fredericton, 11 in Inukjuak, the Grand Rivers, 20, 19 in Nain, 17 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. Lots of sun, 26 in Chibougamau, Val-d'Or, 25 in Saint-Jovite, Montreal, 24 in Quebec City. North Bay is in 28, 27 for Ottawa, 28 for Toronto, 23 in Big Trout Lake, 27 in Thunder Bay, Kapuskasing and Timmins and Elliott Lake, all in at 27. Whakatawaga and Thompson are in at 18, The Paw 22, God's Lake 20. 30 in Gimli, 31 in Winnipeg, 29 in Dauphin, and 32 in Brandon. 29 in Saskatoon, 32 in Regina and Estevan and Swift Current. 21 in the Uranium City and Stony Rapids and La Ronge, 23 in Buffalo Narrows.
Welcome back. Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, the organization that represents all Inuit in Canada, are holding their annual meeting in Inuvik. On Thursday, they'll be selecting a president from 3 candidates. Our Kent Driscoll joins us now from Iqaluit to explain just how the election works. Kent, great to see you. Can you explain just how this election works? It isn't as simple as just having all Inuit vote on the candidates.
No, it sure isn't that simple, Dennis. Now, what happens is any Inuk 18 or over can put their name forward to be ITK president. But only 12 people actually get to vote on who wins. See, Canada has 4 regional Inuit associations. Each of them has an elected president. Each organization gets 1 vote for their president and then 2 more delegates to come along for a total of 12 delegates. So it's not a popular vote. It's a selection process that's being held by leaders who have won a popular vote. The only thing you could really compare ITK to in Canada would be AFN. In AFN's case, it's only the chiefs that vote for the national leader. In ITK's case, it is the leaders of the land claims organizations and a few select others.
And Kent, so who are the candidates this time around?
Well, there are 3 candidates this time, Dennis. The incumbent, Nathan Obed, former federal MP Peter Itanoir, and former bureaucrat and current student Peter Williamson. Now, Obed was first chosen for this job back in 2015. He's just finished his first term.
What are some of the issues that will be in the minds of those few voters tomorrow?
Well, the thing that always comes up with Nathan Obed is Inuktitut. He's not fluent. He speaks usually in English. Now, back in 2015 when he ran, he was grilled by the collective Inuit leadership over how he planned to communicate with Inuit without using Inuktitut. Now, this time out, Obed has his own record to run on. He's a highly educated guy. He has a ton of experience working for the organizations that are doing the actual voting. And he's federally been pushing for the elimination of tuberculosis. Now, the thing that Canadians might recognize him most for is for his efforts to have the Edmonton CFL team change their name. Now, Itanoir, he's pushing his own Inuktitut fluency as an advantage. He's saying his campaign is about communication, and communication he feels would work better for Inuit in Inuktitut. Williamson, he's the least experienced of the 3 politically, but his platform comes from his experience working for organizations like ITK. He wants to see less of a separation between ITK's policies and their programming. He sees the 2 as disconnected right now.
Kent, any predictions for yourself for tomorrow's election?
Well, so much of the campaigning happens in private due to the nature of this election. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but there are a few things you should be keeping in mind. Obed hasn't had any unforced errors. He hasn't made any major mistakes or scandals. And while he is originally from Labrador, he spent a good part of his professional life living here in Iqaluit. So he has grassroots support from 2 of the different regions that get to choose electors for this election. Now, Itanoir last won an election in 1979. Wow. He lost in 1984 and was just crushed in 2008 running federally. He only got 8% of the vote running here in Nunavut. Now, Williamson, he just isn't that well known. So it would be a surprise if anybody but Obed won, but with elections, isn't that the best part? The surprises, you never really know what's going to happen. Regardless, the safe money is on Nathan Obed.
Well, we'll be watching. Kent, good to see you as always. Appreciate you bringing us up to speed on this.
Coin to make, Dennis.
Time now for part 2 of our 3-part series on how much your average chief makes and how much they bill for things like travel to all those meetings they attend. Trina Roche takes a closer look at some of those figures and answers the question, what exactly does a chief do to earn those dollars anyways?
Good afternoon. Welcome to Coquitlam First Nation. My name is Ron Giesbrecht.
Last year, in the wake of the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, many headlines in the media focused on the $1 Million Chief in BC. but the average salary is much more modest at about $60,000 a year for a complicated job.
The role that's defined under the Indian Act is probably about 10% of what you're going to be involved in the community. Housing, infrastructure, businesses, lands, all these other things are things that you have to learn.
4 years ago, Paul commissioned the international company Hay Group to do a study of Atlantic chiefs, the first of its kind in Canada. It looked at the roles and responsibilities of a chief and gauged the worth.
Documenting stuff is critically important in terms of ensuring you have the support of your community. And so, I think that if we do that more, then I think we'll improve our governance and improve our relationship with all our people, so they'll know exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing.
The study likens chiefs to CEOs, politicians, and administrators all in one. Salaries for Atlantic chiefs range between $40,000 to $130,000 a year. Even the higher-end pay is below average when compared to similar jobs. And the study found the chiefs give a quarter of their income back to the community. Chief Sidney Peters makes $115,000. He feels it's fair.
There's lots of decisions to be made, and on a daily basis, as soon as you walk in the door, you're really not sure what you're going to run into. But I said, if you want a $25,000 chief, then that's what you'll get. So I think that in order to bring good people to the community, and good chief and good leaderships, you have to pay, a good dollar, for it.
And his paycheck was the first thing Peters had to figure out. He was elected on the heels of Shirley Clark, who was criticized for making close to $250,000.
We talked about transparency, accountability, employment, economic development, and more jobs. So one of the things was to take a look at, well, how can we, as a council, look at this, and become more accountable.
Terry Pinnell keeps track of her Acadia Band's audits. She says a chief's salary should match what's happening in the community.
If we can't afford education, we can't afford, extravagant salaries either, is the way I see it.
In First Nations plagued by poverty, poor housing, and unemployment, even a modest salary can seem high. Pinnell says being chief isn't the same as being mayor.
It shouldn't be what a MP would get or something of that effect. It should be, as a nation, how are we doing together? How are we prospering together or, cutting back together?
But Paul says making the headlines focused on a few chiefs making big bucks paints all chiefs with the same brush.
And there may not be nothing wrong. Now everything's online, everything's all public above board. So what's next? What else is wrong? Or what's wrong with us, basically, versus we're doing a good job?
And in the end, it's band members who have the final say at election time. Trina Roach, APTN National News, Halifax.
We need to take another commercial break.
But stick around. When we come back, a story about Indigenous kids on Cape Breton Island learning to surf. First, here's the rest of your weather for tomorrow.
To northern Alberta, we're seeing 26 in high level in Fort McMurray and Peace River. Further south, lots of smoke from those forest fires, 27 in Edmonton, 30 in Calgary and Lethbridge. 27 in Kamloops, 23 in Vancouver and Victoria, 25 in Campbell River. 26 in Fort Nelson, 26 in Fort St. John and Smithers as well. 13 in Old Crow, Dawson City's in at 16, as is Whitehorse, Watson Lake's in at 19. 19 too for Norman Wells, Yellowknife at 20, and Trout Lake at 25, along with Fort Laird. Tuck is in at 10, Colville Lake 13, Sachs Harbor 1, Repulse Bay and Cambridge Bay both 8, 14 in Baker Lake, 12 in Arviat, 2 in Arctic Bay, 4 in Igloolik, 5 in Cape Dorset, and 6 in Iqaluit.
Welcome back. There are only a few weeks left of summer, but the surf is still up. In Cape Breton, Indigenous kids are mastering the ocean. Angel Moore had the rough assignment of hitting the beach to bring us this story.
The waves of the Atlantic Ocean can be fierce, but Indigenous youth are going for a ride. Thanks to the Surfing Association of Nova Scotia, communities are coming to the beach. This is Isaac Prosper's first year, and he loves it.
Like, my mom came over to surf, and she wanted to, and she bring kids over. So I was thinking like I should go or not, but so I started coming here.
Krista DeVoe says the water and the waves are an easy attraction, and the kids get a great workout.
Getting these kids in the water and teaching them the basic skills of life surviving, then it's just, and I mean, who doesn't want to come spend a day on a beach once a week throughout the summer?
Kiana Laporte is working to become a surfing instructor and feels the bond formed with the other surfers.
I think it's making a difference in every community, because I feel like everyone comes here as one community and different communities, and then we all kind of join as like one.
The lessons on the water go beyond the beach.
So we want to grow leaders in our communities, whether it's on the beach, in the water, or just within themselves, to become confident enough to reach out and help others who are younger than them or less experienced.
If you are afraid of the waves, the laughter might help wash it away.
Just to come out and have some fun. I think everyone would have so much fun if they just came out and tried it. It's all about trying new things and having an open mind, so.
Summer is almost over, and the kids won't be riding the waves. They'll be hitting the books, but the waves will never be far away. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Cape Breton.
If you're a fan of amusement parks and, more importantly, thrill rides, then brace yourself. A new Canadian coaster is being built that is promising to burst all the records. Canada's Wonderland unveiled the site today for its new Yukon Striker coaster. The park is billing it as the longest, fastest, tallest dive coaster in the world, and it sounds absolutely terrifying.
It's floorless. You got your feet hanging down, only track beneath you, and it's stadium-style seating. So we've got 3 rows of 8. Each row is going to be a little higher than the next, so everyone's going to have a perfect view of that 90-degree drop. You're going to be going straight down into that underwater tunnel and zooming up here at 130 kilometers an hour. It's going to be wild.
The ride will be part of the Parks Frontier Canada section, which will depict the Yukon backcountry during the Klondike Gold Rush era. It's expected to open in April of next year.
That is one ride I will never be going on.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, I know you would.
Count me in.
I was scared of the roller coaster at Tinkertown when I was young. Never mind that. That is your news for this Wednesday. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen. We will see you back here tomorrow. Good night.